Mommy, good night. I want to go to sleep.
Oh no, Marina, you haven't read your bedtime story. Come on.
Seriously, I have to do it again? Fine. Today's bedtime story is called The Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time, there lived a shoemaker and his wife. The man was a good shoemaker and he worked hard. Yet he and his wife were very poor. As time went on, they grew poorer and poorer. At last, the day came when all the shoemaker had left was one piece of leather. It would only make one pair of shoes. That evening, before he went to bed, the shoemaker cut out a pair of shoes from the leather. Then he left them on his workbench, all ready for the next morning. As they were going upstairs to bed that night, the shoemaker spoke sadly to his wife. "I have used my last piece of leather," he said. "I have cut out one pair of shoes. Tomorrow I will sew them. Well, when they are sold, I don't know what will become of us." The next morning, the shoemaker got up early and went to his workshop, ready to make the shoes. On his bench, instead of leather he had left cut out, he found a pair of shoes already made. He was astonished and did not know what to think. The shoemaker took the shoes in his hands and looked carefully at them. They were neatly made, with not one bad stitch in them. He showed the shoes to his wife, who said, "I have never seen such well-made shoes. They are perfect." The shoemaker and his wife could not think who had sewn the shoes. The same morning, a lady came into the shop to buy a pair of shoes. The shoemaker showed her the pair he had found on his bench. She said, "I have never seen such well-made shoes. They are perfect." The lady tried on the shoes and they fitted her perfectly. She was so pleased with them that she paid the shoemaker twice the usual price. With the money, the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 2 more pairs of shoes. That night, before he went to bed, he cut out 2 pairs of shoes from the leather. He left them on his workbench, all ready to sew the next morning. The next morning, the shoemaker got up early and went to his shop to make the shoes. But he had no need to sew. On his bench, he found 2 pairs of shoes already sewn. He took the shoes in his hand and looked carefully at them. Once more, he found that they were neatly made, with not one bad stitch in them. The next morning, a man came into the shop to buy some shoes. The shoemaker showed him the 2 pairs of shoes he had found on his bench. The man said, "I have never seen such well-made shoes. They are perfect." He was so pleased with them that he paid the shoemaker twice the usual price. And so it went on. Every night, the shoemaker cut out some leather and left it on his workbench. Every morning, he found the shoes all neatly made. Many rich customers came to the shop to buy these perfect shoes. So in time, the shoemaker and his wife became rich. One evening, not long before Christmas, when the shoemaker had finished cutting out shoes, he went to his wife. "We still do not know who sews all those shoes for us," he said. "Shall we stay up tonight to see who it is that helps us?" The wife thought it was a good idea, so he lit the candle and they went into the workshop. They hid themselves in a corner of the room. Then the shoemaker and his wife waited quietly and watched to see what would happen. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, the door of this workshop opened quietly. In came two tiny elves. They were dressed in old clothes and their feet were bare. They did not see the shoemaker and his wife, who were hiding in the corner, watching them. The elves jumped onto the workbench and took up the shoes, that were cut out. They began to stitch and sew and hammer. They worked so neatly and so quickly that the shoemaker could hardly believe his eyes. The elves did not stop for a moment until all the cut-out shoes were finished. Then they ran quickly away. The next morning, at breakfast, the shoemaker asked his wife, "How can we thank these little elves who had made us so rich?" "I know what we can do," said his wife. "We can make them new clothes and shoes. Their own clothes are ragged and their feet are bare." During the evenings that followed, the shoemaker and his wife began to make new clothes for the elves. The shoemaker chose the softest leather he could find. He cut out two of the tiniest pairs of shoes ever seen. Then he stitched the shoes as carefully as he could. The shoemaker's wife cut out two white shirts, two small green jackets, and two pairs of trousers to match. She sewed them with tiny stitches. She made two little caps, each with a feather on it. She also knitted two pairs of tiny white stockings. By Christmas Eve, the tiny shoes and tiny clothes were finished. The shoemaker cleared the leather and the tools from his workbench. He and his wife laid the presents on the bench instead of the leather. Then they hid themselves as they had done before and waited to see what the elves would do. Just as the clock struck midnight, the door opened quietly. As before, the two elves came running in. They still wore old clothes and their feet were blue with cold. They jumped onto the workbench, ready to get to work at once. But there was no leather on the bench, only the tiny clothes. The elves were astonished at first, and then they were delighted. In no time at all, they were out of their old clothes. They dressed themselves in the beautiful new clothes, the green jackets and the trousers, the white shirt and the stocking, the soft leather shoes and the little caps, with the feathers that nodded as they laughed. Ha 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 ha! Then they joined their hands and danced around, singing, "Now we are boys so fine to see. We need no longer coppers be." At last, they danced happily out of the room. The shoemaker and his wife never saw the little elves again. But from that time, good luck was always with them. They were rich and happy for the rest of their lives. Mommy, can you let me sleep now? I'm so tired.
Of course.
Goodbye.
Thank you for your story.